Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another week of blockchain gaming news with me, Jenny Jordan, and my co-host, John Jordan. Today is Friday, the 21st of November, and I feel as though it's, we're returning to talk about the same games very much. Hasn't the kind of industry just narrowed down to a few, but more significant games and developers this year? I think that's kind of a fair, simple analysis of it. So first off, we're going to talk about Nexpace and its ecosystem fund. We talked about them last week in their sort of attempt at banning bots and sort of working out a better rewards structure for MapleStory N and MapleStory Universe. So let's talk about the news this week then. The 50 million ecosystem fund. What is it, and what does it aim to sort of do?
Yeah. I mean, just go back to your sort of first point. I mean, I guess when we talk about a company like Nexpace, who are part of Nexon, like the massive South Korean publisher. Although it's interesting that Nexon now they've always been a bit sniffy about, if you put in a headline Nexon instead of Nexpace, the PR's obviously been told to like clamp down on that. So it's an interesting relationship between the two there. But I think in this press release they call them Nexon's affiliate Nexpace, right?
Oh,
I mean, they're affiliate.
That's the first. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I know, they're a fully owned sort of company within Nexon, but they're based in Abu Dhabi rather than Seoul, I suppose. Coming back to your first point. When they can announce something like a $50 million fund, and for the other games we're going to talk about as well, clearly what's happened is basically the bigger projects, or the ones that sort of could raise funds during the sort of early days of blockchain gaming, are the ones that survive. So we're clearly going through a situation where if you didn't raise tens of millions of dollars, or you're a very, very lean team, you're basically run out of money by this stage. So that's sort of why we sort of, every week then, probably for the next year, we'll just continue to sort of talk about those games, because they're from the big companies who probably have a bit better idea about what they're doing, have properly staffed teams, and have money. And even if they need more money, they probably have access to sort of get more money if their funders feel like they just need a couple sort of more years for the market to come around. So that's why we're going to be talking about those same old games. And in fact, compared to some blockchain game sort of sites, we've always tried to focus on the sort of bigger things and not get into the minutiae of all these tiny little games that sort of flare up and for a week and then go down again. So I think that sort of plays into what we've been trying to do over the last few years, really.
Although anyway, that's a trend as well. Early on, from the big blockchain games list, we sort of accumulated thousands and thousands of these games because they were there. They were trying, and you just don't see even that. You don't see these little attempts at games, like you said, popping up for a week or two and then disappearing, because the market's just not that flexible, I suppose, at the moment.
No. So getting on to this particular announcement, I mean, and the reason I sort of wanted to lead with it is it sort of leads into sort of the next bit of news we can talk about as well. But as I say, so Nexpace are a part of a big company, and it sort of reminded me, actually, looking into this, that it was actually 2 years ago that Nexon announced that they were investing $100 million into what became Nexpace. So Nexon said they were going to invest $100 million into their blockchain sort of project, which we didn't know the full details of then at the time. So there's like an internal amount of money, because obviously they're a big company. They've got either access to raising sort of debt or new shares, or to got loads of cash sort of thing. So Nexon, Nexpace is a sort of big company anyway. So this 50 million, I'm not quite sure. If you go to the press release, it actually talks about they're investing up to $50 million in this ecosystem fund. So it's not clear what they definitely haven't done is like opened a bank account and put $50 million into it. I mean, that's not what they've done. And obviously, to some degree, for the money that they are putting in, it could be some of that cash could have been, the sort of the money that Nexon put into Nexpace in the first place. So it could be, some of that $100 million is sort of being recycled. So there's not new money coming in, I don't think. The other thing is, I assume, again, they're not specific about it, is a part of this, or the majority of this, will be the NXPC token that underpins the MapleStory Universe Universe ecosystem. So that's their in-game token. So I imagine, as is normally happens in these blockchain ecosystem funds, is it's sort of seeded mainly with tokens, and then if you are a developer who gets on that into that fund, you get paid out in these tokens that then you have to sell to fund your salaries and stuff. It always seems a little bit odd to me because you're giving away your token to people who are going to have to sell it, so you're putting sell pressure on, and the NXPC token has just gone down. I mean, like all tokens have, but it's, price performance has been pretty awful. So anyway, by the by, the interesting thing about it is they're positioning it as you would do with ecosystem fund, is you're trying to get other companies involved. So they've got a few VCs involved. So Hashed is a big or a well-known South Korean Web3 investor. Actually invested in Axie Infinity. So they've come on board. Whether they're putting any money in, again, it's not clear. It seems like they those companies will do. But people like Chainlink have come on board. So Chainlink may have put money in, but more likely Chainlink have put some link tokens in, and the developers who get access to this fund will get some link tokens in order to use Chainlink's Oracle and infrastructure system. So I imagine the idea is the fund will be sort of worth $50 million in sort of some amount of money, some tokens, some sort of working kind, services in kind. They're talking a lot about they've put together these partners who will be like looking for new projects. They will be investing in projects, but then they'll be sort of mentoring them and sort of using those sort of services that you have as well, sort of consulting and trying to get those projects through. And the reason is that this plays into what Nexpace has always really been talking about, which is not so much about sort of MapleStory N, the PC game that's out at the moment. It's sort of the core element, because that's what people are playing, and these characters are being created and people are getting gear and leveling up gear, and there's not, I wouldn't say it's been a massive success. It's not been a sort of blowout, but I think it's been pretty solid as an economic model, that people are buying these, and you can see there's a few $1 million worth of transactions happening. And what Nexpace want to encourage, and they're already seeing, is small developers coming up and making things like utilities, so you can see which are the best, for your character, which are the best gears that are on sale at the best prices, or some, I think they're talking about actually having sort of little apps that you're not playing the full game, but you're doing certain, you're maybe automating some aspect of the game that you're allowed to automate. And then further down the line with this fund, they're looking to have maybe smaller big games companies coming in and actually say you take your characters and your gear from MapleStory N and you play a totally different game. I mean, in the early days, that may be a very simple sort of rock paper scissors sort of thing, or you may want to have make it a farming game rather than a sort of combat RPG. Or that's what they're looking to do. And that's what they tried to do. Over the 20 years of MapleStory as a Web 2 game, is they've tried to open it up with APIs and things, so people can build whatever they want to within that universe, and and you might come up with some weird things. I mean, that's sort of famously, that's how Counter-Strike came out of the modding scene, and the Dota games and stuff like that. So they're trying to sort of build an infrastructure that uses blockchain around the ability to sort of open source a game, and but the blockchain gives it payment rails and all these sort of other permissionless sort of systems that that sort of come out of having a blockchain. So that's what they're trying to do. This is a very long-term project, so this is not, I think they will hope to get some stuff out till the end of this year. These very simple sort of apps, and in a very different sort of thing. In Soccerverse, a very tiny game compared to this. We already see there's quite a lot of people. They're not always great, but there's people who've created apps around sort of Soccerverse, because it's an relatively open source on-chain game. So people are looking at, if you're playing this team, playing this formation, what's the best formation you should play, or people are doing apps around what are the best deals for players to buy and stuff. So this is not something that just MapleStory N is doing, or MapleStory Universe is doing. This is something that every forward-looking blockchain game should be doing. And even people in the Web 2 space are talking about ecosystems and talking about, obviously Roblox is that example of it. You don't go into Roblox and play Roblox. You play a game someone else has made using their sort of platform. So it's really how the whole games industry going. And actually, I just wrote my Substack yesterday about it, and it's interesting because blockchain really fits into that system, because it's how people build consensus around sort of decentralized systems where there's no centralized control, but you can have money flowing between these, and everyone can see the same data. Everyone's on the same level field. EVE Frontier is trying to do exactly the same thing in its space game. So there is quite a big trend of moving towards that. And if that comes off, it's interesting because you could make a Web 2 game, so it doesn't use any blockchain assets, but the payment system is using blockchain rails. So another game like Reaper Actual from John Smedley's studio. They're going to have a Web 3 version of it with NFTs, a Web 2 version where you have the same assets, but they're not NFTs, so you can't trade them. Or you can trade them on Web 2 rails. But they're thinking about people having servers and setting up servers, and that would all be the blockchain side of it. So it is interesting that we've definitely, moved away from these thousands of very sort of simple blockchain games where they launch a token and some NFTs, and the game doesn't hang together, and everyone takes the liquidity out, and the thing collapses in a big pile of smoke. So these now quite complicated infrastructure pieces, and again, won't go into it all, but you see that on stablecoins. So people like Stripe and Visa and Mastercard and PayPal are all doing things that's using blockchain in the background for sort of payment rails. So that's not the most sort of maybe that's not what we hope blockchain games would be, but maybe that's where we sort of end up, and that would be actually quite a powerful sort of primitive for the whole gaming ecosystem. So
it kind of plays into what we've said for a long time now. It's sort of a very quiet revolution. It's not quiet as such, but it's happening. It's not always the obvious things that you can see, the big breakthroughs, but it's happening sort of under the surface with people not realizing what's kind of happening. Not that it's not transparent, but because people don't care so much, maybe, or don't have to care about it quite so much. So,
it's exactly the same as how much do you know about the open banking in the UK? I mean, not very much, but open banking is a very powerful primitive for the banking system that you can sort of act. If you ever use something like Monzo or some of these sort of new banks where you can just launch into your own other bank banking system and move money around. It's very, very powerful. It's happened in the last few years, but consumers don't know how we even know it's called open banking. It was a government legislative change that allowed all this technology to be used. Technology was there, but you couldn't use it. And now stuff like stablecoins, with the Genius Act and stuff in America, you can use them now. There's proper laws around them, so that's going to be built up first. I guess the hopeful thing is that as all this stuff happens in the background and gets sort of hardens up as an economic system. And if all this stuff is running on stable coins or whatever, then to bring in stable coins for consumers to buy their NFTs, which we'll maybe talk a bit about later on, then becomes an easier next step than sort of like making the game and suddenly you've got to pay in stable coins and no one knows what stable coin is. Whereas now, if stable coins are running the whole banking system and you're maybe getting paid in state, or you're in PayPal, I think in the US, not in the UK yet, but you can change your dollars into their stable coins straight away and earn a yield. Although you can't earn yields anyway, I won't go into all that. But basically, stablecoins just become like you can have a dollar, you can have a euro, you can have a euro stablecoin, you have a dollar stablecoin. People just get used to that, and then I'm just spending some of this in a game, and whether it's a dollar or a stablecoin, it doesn't really matter. And then suddenly with stablecoins, you can do so much more. And then once you've got an economic system going in a game, then maybe you can have use your own token as sort of a next extension of that, rather than blockchain games, and I've been sort of prey to this, thinking that it's a revolution we've taken over, and obviously that hasn't happened. And John Linden, I remember very clearly from back in the day, Mythical Games CEO. In the very early days, we were talking about this sort of stuff, 5 years ago, and he was always, blockchain is a evolution for gaming, and that's really the approach they've taken. And I was like, no, it's a revolution. It's going to take it. Sort of slightly naive, sort of teenage revolutionary, and he was the CEO. Was like, no, and that's he's proven totally right. So.
But can those games be fun? That's the question. We had the Mavens feature earlier this week with actually Nexpace. What's his title actually?
He's CEO, Nexpace CEO.
Nexpace CEO. Yeah, so because they changed it, didn't they, earlier this year? Weighing in with his sort of view alongside CCP Games, Helma Vega-Peterson and Gabby Dyson from YG. Quite a few, actually, heavy industry names, you'd say, leading experts that sort of discussed whether blockchain games can kind of combine what we've just talked about, this sort of financial aspect of a game, payments, rewards system with fun, the entertainment elements sort of thing. And so go out and check that out on the website. I thought there's some great takeaways from that. And it also leads us nicely into talking about Wemade, another South Korean big game company that's got Wemix as I don't know what they call that. Is it like their Web3 arm, Web3 affiliate or so?
No, because that's the technology. Wemix is the technology. So Wemade, I think pretty much now it probably does do some Web2 stuff, but it's Web3 is embedded in what it's doing.
They actually when they send out press releases, they talk about Wemade's game Legend of Ymir. So that leads us on to the news about that. So do you want to sort of
that? I mean, again, it is interesting. Nexon, obviously a South Korean company. Wemade a South Korean company. South Korean companies, as we have discussed, but not so much recently. Were really early to Web3, and they did a lot of stupid things. Frankly, even Wemade.
Like Netmarble and come to us as well.
Yeah, and it's not quite clear how some of those companies, if they're still like Netmarble, if they're still doing their stuff, or come to us whether they're still doing their stuff. They've been very, very quiet. I assume they've probably just sort of dropped it, and they had some quite ambitious plans. And they probably, spent some capital on that. But we are seeing, 5 years on, that the people who, I wouldn't say were more committed, but the people who were committed to go through a few pivots and, take the losses. But clearly some people in those companies believed in the way that some people in those other companies didn't believe that Web3 was going to be the future, particularly for these massive MMORPGs that is sort of characteristic of the Korean market. And we are seeing, with Wemade, I wouldn't say it's like a bang-on success, but clearly now, Legend of Ymir, their sort of game that launched in end of October, the big sort of combat MMORPG. You can play it. I mean, I'm playing it. I've not played it actually a lot because the combat stuff's a bit harder for me. But you can basically just play it as a Web2 game, as sort of the case with Night Crows. But there is Web3 stuff in there, and in fact, there's more Web3 stuff in Legend of Ymir when you get to a certain sort of level in the game, and they really are committed to it, and they really are sort of every game that comes out they have more and more Web3 in there, which is again going back to this evolutionary sort of versus revolutionary sort of approach. The reason I thought this story was interesting is they had this thing called partner servers, and again it sort of plays into what I've been talking about before. And what they did was they auctioned off 10 servers. So I'm not a massive at all. I have sort of very little experience with MMORPGs, but sort of running your own server again is one of these things that communities like to do. And to some degree, there's always been arguments about people running unofficial servers, and that's not been allowed, and getting them shut down, and all this sort of IP law stuff. But with blockchain, there's ways in which you can sort of open that up to the community. So with Wemade have lots of experience of running these massive games. They auctioned 10 of these servers. Now, with these servers, you have a certain level of control, but obviously you can't. You can't ban players entirely from the game. You can ban players from your servers, and they go and play on another server, sort of thing. So it's your own little version of the wider world, and that's what very high-end players sort of like to do. They like to hang around with other high-end players, not the noobs, and do high-end things. So it's been very successful in terms of the auction. So I think the highest one went for about $30,000, and the cheapest one for about $20,000. So clearly, there's people are prepared. People are prepared to spend money to run their own servers. One reason is for the power, so you can say run in-game events and stuff. The other is potentially for investment. So they've said you can earn up to 15% of the sort of margin that that Wemade otherwise would get for sort of in-game marketplaces and stuff. So again, I've sort of not looked into this in incredible detail. I don't think you can sort of make your own NFTs or any of that sort of stuff, but you're sort of plugging in to Wemade's existing sort of economic model that they have. And there's also they've said, I mean, quite how this works, I don't know, but they've said there's for these 10 servers that they auction, there's a minimum guarantee of $1,000 a month. So, I mean, that would seem a bit weird because with after 2 years you'd be making money because you paid sort of $20,000 and you'd be getting $24,000 back. So I don't quite know how that tapers off or anything like that. But anyway, so this has seemed to be successful. People seem to be interested in this. There was a bit of fuss online about, I think they changed some of the terms and conditions, or there was something that sort of happened after the auction that some people complained about. that may just be people complaining about stuff. But now they've announced that maybe this is a reaction to this, or maybe they're doing it already. But they've announced some smaller scale servers, so they're calling them mini and light sort of licenses rather than the original license. So that means that you can have fewer people you can have on a server, and obviously they're going to sell them for, or I think going to auction them. Maybe I don't know, but they're going to be, they're going to be they're not going to cost $20,000. They'll be smaller. So obviously, you need to have a certain setup in order to be able to properly run a big server full of hundreds of people. Maybe if you just want to run a small server for your sort of, not quite your mates, but maybe a bit more like your mates or your clan, and you're going to pay a couple of $1,000. Maybe that's what they're looking for. So, but clearly they think there's something interesting in this sort of server model. And again, it sort of plays back a little bit into what we were saying before about sort of blockchain running as an infrastructure layer for these sort of games. And in this case, they're not running specific infrastructure for these servers. You're just using the sort of servers that Wemade is sort of running for everyone, and you're having your own version of that. But clearly, over time, if it's a success, you'll probably get more ability to customize your version of the game. And I don't think it's unreasonable they would allow you to do NFTs. They're talking about streamers having their own server, and they can monetize their communities through that. They're going to do some deals with sort of IP holders and stuff like that in the future as well. So again, it's sort of playing into what might be what you could piece together now as a very early thing that could become a sort of quite a big trend in 2026.
Good. In funding news, which there hasn't been a lot of in 2025 really, the Indian Web3 rewards platform, is that what you call it? So a Web3 game community rewards kind of hub, Stan, has extended its Series A funding round. So it was announced as 8.5 million. It was extended by 2 million with funding from Sony mainly, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. Sony Innovation Fund. Yeah.
So explain maybe a little bit what Stan is.
I mean, so there's basically sort of two blockchain or Web3 based Indian sort of gaming related apps. It's a little bit, they're a little bit flexible, I think, in terms of where they've ended up with. So obviously, KGen, which did its token launch a couple of months ago, that sort of started out as IndieGG, which was a sub DAO from YGG in India, and they took that over a few years ago, and they've sort of made it much bigger and taken it sort of global. And a lot of their activity was driven by the fact their token's gone live. So it'd be interesting to see, in the next sort of 6 months when obviously people are grinding for a token, and once they get the token, not so interested. Stan is sort of broadly similar. I mean, looking at it yesterday, and they are talking much more about sort of a social gaming platform with UGC for creators, like all the buzzwords everyone sort of uses. Quite how you get that to stick in the long term is, we will wait and see. But I think the reason that these two have been doing well in terms of funding is partly that India, people really like the Indian market because it's massive and growing and all that sort of stuff. But the Indian games market was all about what they call real money gaming. So that was basically people sort of doing mini, sort of micro bets almost, often around sporting events. So cricket and stuff like that. And that was a really, really big market. And so there was some really quite big money invested in those companies, like hundreds of millions of dollars over the last few years. And I'm not quite sure why the reasons. I'm not au fait on Indian politics, but basically there's a lot of backlash around that, and the sort of typical thing about people saying that their friends committed suicide over debts around this sort of thing. I don't know if that's true. Obviously, to some degree, probably is. But anyway, I don't know how big of a national issue it was. But basically, all these real money gaming systems got banned, and the ban actually came in at the start of October. So basically, all the companies who were running these apps, and there was like 10 of them, at least. There's about $2 billion of revenue there. That's all just gone, and all that investment has sort of gone away, because that was the problem with the Indian market. Is it's really big, but it's really hard to monetize. Obviously, you can run advertising, which is good for a big market, but if you're advertising to people who haven't got enough money to spend, then your advertising is not very high end. You're not getting much money from advertising. So there's always a bit of a catch-22 on that. And the real money gambling worked well, and that was the way people could actually access this very large number of relatively poor people. And that's gone away now. So I think for international investors, it's not a direct replacement at all, but it's sort of how can I have access to what is a really big market that we expect to be growing and we expect to be getting richer and is interested in gaming. And it happens that Stan and KGen are the sort of two left standing there. So I think that's why that money's come in there. And we'll sort of see. I just think that those models are really quite hard to run. I think they can be. Having spoken to the guys at KGen in particular, I think just the operating costs of running those things can be quite big. Because often you're running sort of big esports tournaments or you're having to sort of pay creators up front or, KOLs and stuff, Indian KOLs to get them to front your adverts to get people to download your app. And as we know, it's just hard to monetize people. Maybe if you give them free internet money, that helps you in that business model, but it's still at some point, someone has to be paying for something.
Yeah. Now then, talking about Web3 kind of ecosystems, Roblox-like platforms, you spoke to Maxwell Holmes from Hytopia this week.
Yeah.
Hytopia is perhaps was the kind of the earliest ones that were kind of talking about being a sort of Roblox, Minecraft type platform in Web3 kind of blockchain-enabled version. So, I mean, you'd had him on the podcast before, hadn't you?
Not him, no.
Okay. How is that kind of game coming along? And they've been around for a long time now, haven't they?
Yeah. Yeah, so actually I had the other co-founder, ArcDev, on before. Maxwell's the other. So ArcDev is like the coder, and Maxwell is the sort of more business sort of guy. So good to have him on, actually. And as you say, so what's now Hytopia started out as NFT worlds back in the day of sort of metaverse, and actually going back, everything's circular. We planned it well. They started out as basically being a crypto payment method for Minecraft servers. So Minecraft, obviously massive game, and a big thing in Minecraft is running your own servers. And lots of people have built, fairly decent businesses on putting together the tooling to easily create your own servers. So you can set up your own Minecraft world with its own attributes. So obviously servers are sort of the big thing in Minecraft. Minecraft is quite clunky. I mean, I've never really interacted with it, but if you're trying to set up these servers and do all this sort of payment stuff, it's pretty clunky. And so they just thought, put some blockchain in there, and that will really, help all this sort of clunkiness. They sold some NFTs. So at some point, the NFT world land were more expensive than sandbox ones. I think there was a sort of big debate about which was the better company. But Microsoft basically, I don't know if it's Microsoft or Mojang, one of them decided they were banning anyone using blockchain around Minecraft, which was maybe obviously is a very young focused sort of user base. You can see there was a sort of a likelihood of sort of scams and stuff going on in there, but clearly by banning everyone, then that sort of meant that what could have been quite a nice solution for fixing a problem in Minecraft, wasn't. So they had to basically what became then Hytopia. They've gone through lots of grinding sort of situations where they basically had the sort of legs pulled from under them, and this was like the big one. And they decided they were going to build their own version of Minecraft. This is where they've ended up now, and they've had lots of problems. They launched their token. I can't remember what the token was. Really called Topia, and I think they've gone through various blockchains, and they've basically just killed that token off and relaunched it as HYBUX on base. So they've gone through all that sort of trauma, and people getting really annoyed, and people losing money, obviously, because when you launch a token that you have to sort of shut down and reissue, that's never good for people. But anyway, they've basically got quite a. I think they would say now they've got a sort of entry level platform that sort of basically works. Their token's now live, and this is sort of the starting point for whether they can build something out. So as we sort of discussed, they started out Minecraft focused. They've ended up a bit more like Roblox in the sense that there's no base game for Hytopia, and all the games you play there, other people have made. So they're really sort of quite dependent on creators. As you sort of expect in an interview, Maxwell was sort of like, I was saying, why would anyone build for you rather than Roblox? And he'd say, well, Roblox is really saturated, blah, 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 blah. But the thing about Roblox is it's growing really fast, got tons and tons of users, and they spend money. Whereas obviously Roblox is starting basically from zero, so you have a cold start sort of problem where you get creators in a platform, where there's no users, and Hytopia don't really have tons of money. They're quite a scrappy sort of team, so they haven't got tons of money to fund creators to come in anyway. So it has to be organic. But that's where they are, and they are. It's quite interesting. That for the headline, I said, it's a quote from Maxwell, and he said, crypto's cool, but funds number one. So they're very much focused on. They understand that crypto's not going to get them very far. They think, they're from a day one a crypto project. They're not like someone who's going to suddenly go, oh, we're just going to do Web 2. I mean, they are a proper crypto project. They've got these various NFTs out there. They've got a token, but he's sort of like, particularly because they skew younger. It's a web-based platform, although you can download a PC client or mobile client, and you just go in. And there's a whole bunch of games you can play. It's very much very much looks like Roblox experience. The monetization, I think, is now in with the token going live, so you can buy things in the game. Obviously, that goes at the moment. 85% of that revenue goes to the creator of the game, and they say you can use the token, so they're incentivizing people to use the token. You get a better deal using the token, but you don't need to use the token. You can just use normal payment methods. But behind the scenes, as everyone sort of does, that uses the token, and 15% of, if I spend $100 in the game, $85 goes to the creator, $15 basically it's not quite burnt, but it basically sort of gets burnt to reduce the supply. So there's some sort of, whether it actually has a big enough effect, deflationary effect on the token, who knows? But the token's just on DEXs, so it's not on Binance and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully the token price is not going to get massively smashed down by people who got it for free, sort of selling it on. Although if you did have the Hytopia token, you did get some of this HYBUX. So there are maybe people who just do want to sell out at the moment because they just want to wash their hands of it. So yeah, it's a good starting point. I mean, I think they will, just because Roblox is just sort of eating the world. It's just hard to get any. No one's competing with them, I guess. So they have to find their own audience. That will be the sort of tricky thing for pretty much every blockchain game, to find your audience. But that's what they're doing, and it was good. They were sort of say very clear that the games have to be sort of fun. So.
Well, I've been talking to a lot more Web 2 game developers this year, and it's very similar there. I mean, how do you find your audience in such a saturated market, and actually saturated by what? By Roblox and Fortnite. It's the same struggles. So we often talk about it as Web3 kind of developer specific problems, but it's gaming all over. It's just kind of good to have that context. So finally then, let's talk about Moku and its Grand Arena. It's launched pre-season on Ronin. It's already launched, isn't it? It's launched this week.
Yeah, the pre-season. So there's a 4-week pre-season. And if you have their NFTs, so the project's called Moku, the NFTs are called Moki. If you have one of those, you can start trading it, and then it basically goes into auto battles and sort of levels up, and you earn sort of XP. It's not proper XP, but it's XP that will go into the main season. I mean, it's quite an interesting project. And there's not much going on Ronin really at the moment. So they did sort of. It does seem to be, when they did their pre-sale, people seem to be quite interested in that. So we'll see. I do think Ronin had a brilliant year last year in terms of lots of interesting games looking like they were going to do well, and then sort of everything sort of fell apart. But clearly, it's still a big community, historic community of people who like blockchain gaming. So you kind of think at some point, something will not necessarily get really big, but things will launch on there and find an audience. So we'll see. It's just sort of projects to look at as well, because they are when the actual season 1 goes live, there is some interesting little AI stuff that they're trying to do. It's quite an ambitious project, maybe a bit too ambitious for these sort of straitened times in terms of trying to get people to sort of wager on AI agents and stuff like that. But we'll leave that for another podcast. I still think the AI agent stuff is a really big sort of thing that I thought at the start of this year, I thought was going to be really big this year, and basically there's been Zippo on it not just in blockchain, but in general. But I think for 2026, it's everything sort of, clearly is improving on the sort of AI front. They're becoming much more capable. Then at some point, it may still be 2027, but clearly they're sort of moving towards this sort of stuff when AI agents can do more than just sort of party tricks. So we'll see.
That leads me on very nicely to the last point. So if you want to hear more of John Jordan's ramblings, AI Web3,
Who doesn't?
you should consider attending Pocket Gamer Connect London on January 19th to 20th, which will cover all the latest trends and conversations in mobile, PC, console, AI, Web3, the lot. It'll be transmedia, it'll be the global apps kind of economy. It's basically the whole lot. Catch John there, which you'll be there the whole conference, won't you?
Yeah, it seems like I was mainly going down with Soccerverse, the company I talk about, so the fully on-chain football management economy game. So I'm going to be showing that off. I'm going to be giving a talk about what it's been doing and how it's growing and the opportunity there. I'm also now doing the blockchain gaming top 50, it seems. So maybe by the time it actually happens, maybe I'll be doing tons of stuff. But I will be there for all 2 days. So.
Excellent. On that note, let's finish up. See you all next week. Thank you all for tuning in. Bye-bye.